Perfect. Hey, you didn't miss much. I just said good morning. But welcome. Welcome to worship. Today here at Sunlight PGA, we continue our Stand Firm series, and I'd like to welcome Dan Hernandez up to the stage. You might know Dan. You've seen him around here. Let's give him a round of applause and some welcome. Dan is an incredible guy, and he's got an incredible story. To be fair, Dan, you're just half of the story, but you're telling it today, and so it's going to be all about marriage. We're looking in Ephesians chapter 5, that section that talks about how husbands ought to love their wives. And so Dan is going to share candidly about a growth journey that the Lord has had him on for probably 6 years now, I think you said, which is just incredible. And I hope this is really encouraging because as you tell your story, there are going to be plenty of people out there who are saying, I'm so thankful that the church is talking about this. I thought I was the only one. I wish I had the courage that Dan has to share as openly as he is. And so I just want you to know at the very beginning, that as Dan shares and as we pull out ideas from Scripture, that you are not alone. Every marriage, in fact, goes through a period of time where we need like a reset. You're going to say it later, but I'm going to steal it because it's a good line. But God talks about how marriage is like an anvil that God works on us in. That he says it way more eloquently than I just did. But it's true. And so if you find yourself in a spot like that, just know that, Dan is an incredible resource. We would love to chat with you too. But God does great work on us in marriage. So enough of me talking. Dan, why don't you just briefly introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you, and then where this journey began.
My name is Daniel Hernandez. I'm 42. Right now, as of today, I've been married 21 years. I got 2 boys, Ryan and Ethan. And it's, just we had it started the journey that God put me on because I could see it clearly now that God was truly working in my life. A little difficult at the time, through the struggle and the challenges. But back in 2020, we were killing it, like as my children say. We were killing it and just doing well as worldly success, with just, the stuff that you think is important, possessions and house and cars and business and all these things that were, so important to me at the time. And, one day I just woke up and, seen things differently. It was, I had the boys at the time were like, I don't know, they were both like going to the Sunlight campus. They were both, we were in church. We were doing all the things that, I wasn't reading my Bible. It's sometimes difficult to understand, I'll be honest with you. But God has definitely revealed himself in this process to make me understand what he said and what he, that this is, the Ephesians 5 is a manual. It's like he created marriage. He gives us the manual of how to live it out, and I wasn't living it out,
So you were saying that at the time, you had a lot of things going on that we would count as like markers of success. But there was one area of life, your marriage, where it wasn't a success.
Yeah.
Take us back to that moment. When did you first realize that something was off or something was wrong?
It's actually a very specific moment. My boys were in soccer, and we were just running a million miles an hour, taking them around and doing things like that. And I just remember catching a glimpse of my wife, like happy and smiling and bubbly, and the like everything that I loved about her. But it was like on the outside, at home it wasn't like that anymore. We sat on separate sides of the couch. It just wasn't the same. And, when I would confront Heather about these things, she would just say, we make great business partners. And that one cut me deep. Like I think of the line from Shrek where you cut me deep, you cut me real deep. uh, and that really set me on a journey. I read hundreds of books and listened to, I don't even know, just because of my job, thousands of hours of podcasts. And, I would come home to my unsuspecting wife and just try new things. Like, hey, I'm going to act this way. I'm going to act that way. I'm going to, and a lot of it didn't work. Most of it didn't work. And
let me stop right there. That's a great place to pause just for right now. Steve, pick up here. He mentioned Ephesians 5. Tell us a little bit about verse 25.
Yeah, I think what Dan's talking about, we probably can relate, a lot of us probably at some point in marriage, right? This idea, in that statement, we make great business partners, that does, that cuts deep for me, for you, to hear that. But I think probably a lot of people feel that way, You probably feel like, man, with my partner, we do life really well, but we don't really do marriage really well. And there's a big difference, And when you bring up Ephesians 5, a lot of people are like, oh man, here we go. Here's another submission type message, and the women are probably like, you're going to tell me to submit to my husband, blah, blah. And I get that because it's in there. It's in that passage there. And so we get that. But here's really what I want us to maybe jump into and to dive into. And that's in verse 25. Paul, when he starts talking about husbands, he doesn't start with authority. He starts with love. And I think that's a pretty big deal. I think that's something that we really ought to pay attention to in this passage, is this idea of love. He says there in verse 25, he says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's a pretty big statement, and what he's talking about here. That's Paul's definition of what it means for a husband to lead his wife. And I think that's important because when we hear this word like headship, we can instinctively think about authority, right? And we think, I'm in control, right? I'm the head of the house. I'm the one who's supposed to lead. I'm the one who's making the decisions, and you're just going to just follow along with that. But that's not what Paul does. And I think there's something we need to understand here, is that headship isn't authority first, it's love first. And Paul, he doesn't leave us to define what that even looks like. He gives us the ultimate model of that when he says that just as Christ loved the church. I mean, think about that for a minute. If you want to know what Christian leadership in a marriage looks like, Paul says, look at Jesus. Look how Jesus led. Look what Jesus did for the church. He sacrificed himself for it. He didn't just lead by demanding that the church serve him, right? He didn't say, hey, just do these things. He actually led by example, right? He led by giving himself for the church. His love was self-giving. It was sacrificial. His love was initiating. And so we have this beautiful picture of what love really looks like. And this is the idea of focusing on Jesus. And that's what true headship should look like. That's what true leadership in the home should look like. So Christian leadership is not this idea of how do I get my wife to follow me? How do I get her just to submit to me? That's not the ultimate goal. That's not what we're looking for. What we're really looking for is this. How do I love my wife in such a way that my leadership looks more and more like Jesus? That's the ultimate goal. That's what we're looking for in this. And so, Dan, let's get back into your story now. Before this moment, when you heard Heather say, we make great business partners, what did you think, your leading in your marriage look like? Does that make sense? Where did that picture of your idea of, okay, this is how I'm going to rule my home, how did that look like? I know when we've talked before, you've talked about, checking out and dominating and those types of things in your leadership approach. Can you, explain to them a little bit about that and fill them in?
Yeah, I thought that, where I felt the most success was at work. At home, it was difficult. It's chaos. It's tough raising kids. They're important to me, and just so, I mean, I want to be around all the time. It's just the place where I got the instant success was at work. You know, God gave me whatever gifts he gave me, and I would go out and do it. And that's where I felt the best. So I just felt like headship was to provide and to make sure that they were safe. I checked the box, you know, in the going to church and stuff like that. But now in retrospect, I realize that I wasn't really doing what God asked me to do, like at all. I mean, I was doing what culture told me to do, to win, you know, big truck, you know, all that stuff. And, you know, sure, it might have made me cool, but it definitely didn't. I wasn't leading my house at all. It was, yeah, for sure.
Dan, it's really helpful, and I think what I love about this part of your story is when we come back to Ephesians 5, we find out that, man, if we're leading well in the way that Christ desires and teaches us to lead, we're going to see an impact, and it's going to be in our wife. And so we're going to continue on in verses 26 and 27, and we read there, Paul says this, continue on, loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church. Is this my mic? Yeah? Okay. And to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Man, what I really want to draw out of just this short passage of Scripture is this image that Paul gives us of what Christ's love and leadership does for the church. Because of Christ's leadership and love, when you and I stand before God in the very last day in the judgment, we stand there blemish-free. All of the sin, all of the shame gone. When we stand before God, He's going to present us as a beautiful bride, a radiant bride who's glowing. And the reason they're glowing is because of the effect of Christ's love and what he accomplished for us. So, men, this is actually a pretty huge and tough standard. That I think what Paul is saying here is essentially, as a result of our love and leadership in our home, our wives ought to become more radiant, more fulfilled, and more of who God meant them to be over the course of our leadership, which means that the way that we lead has to be in that direction. And that's a pretty tall order. I mean, obviously we can't remove sin like Jesus does, but certainly it means that we are looking for ways to lead and encourage and cause them to flourish so that they become this radiant bride. Maybe even, I remember one author says, our wives ought to be more beautiful after 25 years of marriage than on the day that we married them. I know that's happening with my wife, probably despite my leadership, but definitely it's a huge goal. It's a huge goal. So I think you've got another question to prompt him. You don't, I do. So I've got too many cards up here. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so Dan, as you were going through your story earlier this week, you were looking at the outward signs of success, but noticing there was inward dissonance, particularly in your relationship. And at first, it was really easy to just look at your wife and say, well, it's her fault. Like if she did things differently, maybe everything else would be differently or go different. But the Lord confronted you about that and said that it was you who had to do the changing first. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was it like to be confronted with that truth, and then what did you do in response?
Yeah, this is definitely where the pain set in, because it was a lot easier for me to just look outward and say, hey, you know, you could love me better. And, I tried, believe me. It's like, a difficult thing. And thinking that that would be the way through was to just, I wrote down, I was domineering, I was passive at the same time. I was domineering in the sense where I wanted my way. Passive as in I wasn't doing what God asked me to do. I was a lot like a toddler. I really kind of think of it that way. I was just a child who was only happy when I got what I wanted, and I was the first to complain and the first to take. And yeah, when I finally got to the stage where everything else wasn't working is when I think really God revealed, himself to me. Through this whole process, he's really pulled me closer to him. And, it's amazing how Ephesians 5 really kind of just revealed itself to me in just a totally new way. I truly believe that he makes us suffer so that we can draw closer to him. It started with me understanding what love really meant, which is love is a verb. It's an action. It's the thing that I do. The culture says that if you feel love, then you respond with action. So there's many times in my relationship where maybe I don't feel like a strong love in that exact moment. Maybe she's arguing with me, or as we call intense fellowship. But definitely, I started to read and understand and actually pivot from more of like books that had to do with what culture said. And even though I prayed for discernment in those moments, like of reading those books to give me what he wanted me to hear, but he had me suffer so that I can get to a great book by Tim Keller, which is The Meaning of Marriage. This idea that you serve first and then the feeling of love comes after. I had it completely wrong for like 15 years. I think it's something that you have to go through, and that's when I really started to see the change.
Dan, thanks for that. It's so true. Truth of what God calls us to, that leads, and the feelings will catch up at some point. But if we wait for the feelings to lead us off, we're never really going to get started. Yeah. Dan, one part of the story here that I think is helpful is you mentioned like being passive, and that's one of the ways that we can run into trouble if we let culture lead the way in terms of how we lead our families. I mean, especially if you're watching TV, right? Like, name one father on cable network right now, or I'm 45, so I use that term still, where there's a father figure that you want to emulate, right? I think we kind of go between these two ideas, and there's the next slide here, where we either tend to abdicate, meaning give up our responsibility, or to dominate, which is to become authoritarian. And I just want to run through this quickly because I want to think like, man, if those are the only two things that we're choosing between, we are giving our wife and our family really terrible models of what it means to be a husband and to be a leader. And so, on the abdicate side, really what that is that's immaturity that's expressing itself as a victim mentality. It's saying, if I don't get what I want, I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to, which you mentioned. Yep. Man, that results in a checked out husband, checked out father. We tend to show up emotionally shut off, don't even want to engage. It makes our wife become really the husband and the wife, because somebody has to do the part that we're not, and it usually will fall to her. What it shows our family is that the father is impotent. He doesn't have the power to do, or he won't. He's checked out. And then what it means for us as individuals, as men, is that we fail to live up to the potential that God has given us. He's called us to be stewards in this world, to lead. And when we don't, man, we feel the effect of that. There's some similar negative things when we go over to the dominating side, where immaturity shows up just a little bit differently. It disguises itself in authority. Authority is not negative. It's a good thing. Yet when we use it in a domineering way, man, we're totally twisting what God originally designed. And so that shows up in controlling. We try to micromanage our family and make sure everything goes just the way it's supposed to or we want to. That makes us emotionally reactive, overreacting to even small things. In that, we make our wife subordinate, which is not her God-given role. It gives an image to our kids that a father is a cruel master. And how our kids see their earthly father really influences the way that they see their heavenly father. And then what we're doing to God's design is we're totally distorting what headship is supposed to look like. So, Steve, I jumped in there, and I just wanted to bring that up. And as you continue on in the next few verses, you're going to talk about how our leadership really ought to provide for the nourishing and the care of our wife and our family. So I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Yeah, I keep thinking about what Dan was talking about, about blaming Heather, like what's her fault, and sometimes that cuts me deep. Is that the phrase? That cuts me deep? Because how often do we think like that way, right? Man or woman, right? We're like, well, if my spouse would just change, right? If he would just start doing this, or if she would just start doing this, if they would change this, then I would change this, and that's how we look at things. But that's not how we should do it. And you talked about this idea here, and you mentioned Tim Keller, but Paul's picture of headship follows that. It's Christ-like headship goes first, right? If we're going to lead well, we're going to go first in those things. That means we're going to go first, not like in I'm going to tell her what to do first type of thing, but we're going to go first in repentance, right? We're going to go first in forgiveness. We're going to go first in humility with our spouse. We're going to go first in love, right? So going first is asking this question, like, what can I do to help my spouse flourish? That's what we're asking. Tim Keller, he talks about this idea that headship is not about having more power. It's about taking greater responsibility. And that's what Paul is talking about here. Look here in verse 28 and verse 29 of our text. He says, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. And then verse 29, he says this, after all, no one ever hated their own body, but they feed and care for their body just as Christ does the church. The language I think that's used here, Zach, is very interesting because Paul doesn't just say sacrifice, right? He says to feed it, to care for it. Maybe in another translation, maybe you've got, it says nourishes and cherishes. That's what we're looking to do with our spouse, to feed it. In other words, it's not just about these heroic moments where we jump in and we, fix the car. We jump in and we, fix the sink or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. But it's the ordinary moments, the everyday things, right? Because we don't just nourish our body once a year, right? That would be silly, right? We don't just do it once a week. That would be crazy. Right? We feed it. We take care of it. We pay attention to our bodies. We know when we're tired and when we're hungry and when something is hurting, and then we respond to that. And that's the way our marriage should be. So Paul's giving this picture of us loving our wives, men or ladies loving your husbands. Paul's giving this idea that our love should be attentive. It should be ongoing. It should be something that's personal, something that's tender. And I think that's where it gets really practical for us. One of my most favorite marriage books out there, it's a book called His Needs, Her Needs. It's written by a guy named Willard Harley. Anybody read the book? You should. Thank you. Good. I'm glad somebody has. Fantastic book. One of my favorite books. In this book, Willard Harley, he lists what he calls are the biggest needs that a man has and the biggest needs the woman has. They're not like fixed on this, like every man needs these and every woman needs these. They can cross-contaminate or whatever in that. But that's the idea on that. Some of you have probably heard of the love languages, the 5 love languages. It's a very similar idea to this. I think the difference is that the 5 love languages is like the delivery system of love. Like, this is how to do it. Whereas I think these needs, his needs, her needs that Willard Harley points out, this is more of like the identifier of what my needs, what my spouse's needs are. And that's why I really love what these are. We've got them on the screen there for the husbands. Again, these are not, they could cross in there. But there's sexual fulfillment, recreational companionship, an attractive spouse, domestic support, admiration, all those for a husband. And for wives, most commonly, it's affection, conversation, honesty, and openness, financial support, family commitment. You can even look at the 5 love languages and look at these, and they really blend together really well. So what I love about this book is how it lays it out. And Willard Harley, he talks about this thing, and again, it's not new with him. Maybe he started it and other people copied. I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg. I have no idea. But he talks about this thing called a love bank, that all of us have a love bank. Anytime you meet somebody, you open an account of love with that person, right? So if you have good encounters with that person, if Zach and I, we have a love account together here, and if we have good deposits, good interactions, we deposit into that love bank. And so that builds for a good relationship. If we have a bad interaction, which I don't think happens very often, at least not on my end, why are you looking away? He's like, oh, yeah. But if we have bad, then it would pull out of that. And so what Willard Harley talks about is like, if your love bank with your spouse gets really low, the account gets really low, that's when we're susceptible for affairs. We're susceptible to going and finding a healthy account that we look for. And so it's a pretty cool little system there. If you want to know more about that, just see me after church. I'd love to talk to you about it. I can direct you to a website that can help you to look through those with your spouse and help you to try to identify those things, and maybe you guys can open some communication with those things. But here's what I love about these needs, is that really helps us answer this question. Do I actually know what makes my wife feel loved? That's the answer we need to know. What makes her feel loved? Not provided for, not secure, but how does she feel loved? You see, I can love my wife according to my definition of love, and then I can completely miss her. And I think that's probably maybe what was happening, like for Dan and them when talking. Dan you're really good at providing. You said, I got the business thing down. I'm going to provide for we're going to have all the things, baby. We got it all. I got you a house. I get you a nice car. We'll get you whatever. I can do all that. But I think you come to realize I'm not loving her well. And that's what began to change for us. And so there's a difference between sacrificing and nourishing, right? Sacrificing asks, what am I willing to give? Nourishing asks, what does she actually need? And so we're trying to figure that out and trying to answer those questions there. So that gets us right back, Dan, into your story, because once you begin to figure that out and you begin to do things, it probably wasn't some just big, gigantic, romantic gesture, right? It was the ordinary stuff. Like you begin to learn what she needs and how to work with her and how to move for her. And it was learning that sometimes, loving Heather meant moving toward her, and sometimes loving her meant giving her room to re-engage in there. And so, but you had to learn what that was. What helps her feel safe? What helps her feel seen? What helps her feel valued? What helps her feel, loved in those moments? And how can she flourish? And what you said, I think, is key, is that you learned you had to go first. It wasn't, well, when she starts doing it, I'll start doing it back. You said, no, I'm going to do it first. And I think that's what's a key thing here. So Dan, bring us into that ordinary stuff. What did you actually start doing different in your relationship? Talk us through those normal everyday things there in that, and what it looked like even to give Heather some space, to let her re-engage. What did that look like for you in your weeks, and as you begin to walk through this process of loving her better?
Yeah, I would say that I heard that marriage is like a dance. So every day you're doing a dance, and it takes one person to change the the dance moves. And then, the other person is thrown off a little bit, and yeah, it may get worse before it gets better, but, some of those things were, I didn't have all the tools that I needed. I had a good mother and father. They had, it was an okay situation, but I went to therapy by myself. We went to therapy together, just to learn like communicative skills. How to communicate better. And I learned things like there's always one pursuer and one distancer, and as I'm definitely the pursuer in every aspect. Just go 100. I'm going 100 miles an hour. It's got to be tiring, to be Heather. But learning that when we would have a disagreement, she needed time to process what I was saying, and I wanted to solve it immediately, like right now, like before we leave. It has to be fixed. And what I learned was she needed time. So the gift that I gave her was, I gave her the gift of time to say, hey, you process this, if it's 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever. And then the thing that she gave me was she would give me the gift of re-engagement. And that really, it was a way that I felt loved, that she cared about the situation. And this works both ways now. This idea that if my wife is the easiest going, never complain, no honey-do list in my entire life. Just a gift from God for sure. So that distancer and pursuer was really, really helpful. Also, there was a tough time where, going through all this, I just remember we have a men's group, but the two buddies of mine, we were going through a book, and Stand Firm and Act Like Men, where this comes from. And just, I was learning that one of the best things that you could do is to pray openly over your wife. And the weirdest thing is I could do anything out there. I could build anything. I'm a pursuer. But the act of praying over Heather openly just seemed undoable. It's so strange. I wrote this down, which you guys have heard before, the whole 1 Peter 5:8, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. I felt that in that moment, that, I was abdicating my responsibility as a biblical headship in the home. And although on the outside, this is important, although on the outside, it looked as if everything was fine. Culture would say, you're winning. But the reality is, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do, and I felt it. My wife felt it. My children feel it. And I got 2 boys, and it hit me at that moment, too, that it was just like, I have a responsibility to my boys to show them what loving my wife. I would say all these things. It's personal. They would say in therapy that you're doing all the things. You're saying all these things, and you could speak my speak, is what she said. But you haven't started doing any of them. And that one really hurt. I remember telling Kyle that, and he just laughed. And it was really interesting. But when I finally broke through, it took me 3 weeks to actually pray over Heather. And in this book, Stand Firm and Act Like Men, Joby Martin says, if you want to pray over your wife, just grab her hand and say, hey, honey, what do you want me to pray for you about? And just listen to everything she says, and then when she's done telling you, just bow your heads and say everything she said back to you, and say amen. It's that simple. So every day, or almost every day, I ask Heather, hey, Heather, what is the one thing that I could pray for you today? And boy, did the power, the Holy Spirit coming into our marriage just in that moment, just unlocks everything. There was a lot of pain, but let me tell you something. I don't know where you guys are at in your marriage or relationship, but it's like renovating a kitchen. Somebody said it made a lot of sense. You tear everything out, and it's uncomfortable, and maybe you're cooking in the bathroom. But the reality is, it's beautiful when on the other side. So, and I've experienced it. So
Dan, I would imagine, having experienced it too in my life, but we want to hear from you. the step of like going to therapy, whether it's individually or couples therapy, there's a lot of friction there. Right? And so I'm going to guess that in our crowd, there's at least one who's like, I know therapy is what we need, but how did you know that therapy was that next step, and what got you through that friction? Like, what got you to take that first step?
Well, like I mentioned, in the beginning, I just thought one of the things was in the beginning, all the books that I tried, I just would be like, if you just read this book, everything's going to be better. And she didn't want to read any of the books. And, now in retrospect, it's just God was working on me, specifically me, as the biblical man in the relationship to serve her. And he was just tearing me down to rebuild me. And so therapy, I just felt like I tried everything else, and I just didn't have the tools to like communicate. I mean, I would come home and just I was tired, and if the house wasn't like the counter, she works too, and if the counter wasn't clean, I would just be frustrated, and I would take it out on everybody. And one thing I want to say about leadership or biblical headship, just idea that I didn't realize that my role as leading the house is simple as this. I started a diet. We used to eat 5 bags of tortilla chips, organic tortilla chips, but a week. And I would be frustrated. If you don't have all the, chips, like how hard is this? Can't you just put it, I only have 5 staples, that I eat basically. And the reality was all I did was go on a diet and change not being able to eat chips. And my entire family followed. I didn't even make them. None of them. I mean, they're not even on the diet. And it just was a small window into the fact that what a leader means and what impact it has on my family. It was super powerful. But yeah, therapy with the communication was huge. It was difficult to go over that hurdle. I've noticed even my mom and dad have been married 40 years, and they don't want to go to therapy. I get it. It's like a stigma. It's just, that means accepting that we have a problem. But I'm just telling you that it's worth it. It works. Heather felt like she was in a safe place to bring up something that, was small or something that she just didn't want to tell me, and I'm just like, wow, 15 years in, this idea that I wish I would have known, I could have fixed it. I have this do-it-yourself attitude that I could fix it. That led me astray in the beginning, for sure.
So in reality check, all marriages have problems. That's what. We'll get to that because you've got good stuff. Anyways, all marriages have problems. And I think now in the passage, Paul is going to make a little bit of a shift. So as we turn to verse 30 through 32, we're going to start to think through some of the why. So we've been talking about the what needs to happen, but now we're looking at the why, and it's a big why. So beginning of verse 30, it says, "For we are members of Christ's body. So for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh." This is all the way back to creation. This is how God designed men and women for each other. And then it says, now this is a profound mystery, but listen to what Paul says. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. You see, even from the very beginning, God gave a human institution, marriage, to represent or to point us forward to the relationship that Christ would have with his people in the church. And so when I'm doing premarital counseling, one of the things that I bring up is that this makes marriage a big deal, right? This isn't just about a man and a woman and how well they're going to relate to each other for as long as they can put up with each other. This is men and women together represent the relationship between Christ and the church. It's a big deal. And so the way that we act and the way that we treat each other within a marriage is a witness. So you might be out here and thinking, man, what does this message have to do with me? I'm not a husband, and so I don't need it. Well, let me tell you, if you are a young man who's not married, this message is all about the kind of husband that you ought to aspire to be. If you're a young lady and not married yet, this is about the kind of husband that you ought to be looking for. if you are married, husband or wife, this is the goal, the ideal, is to represent Christ in the church in your marriage. And front and center in all of this is the gospel. The whole reason that there is a Christ in the church is because what God has done for us in Christ. When there was a problem, God went first in love, just like he tells us to as husbands. And so I think about it as like when sin separated us from God, that put us facing away from each other. And you know in a conflict that if you two are arguing, it takes somebody to turn around and to make the first move. And that's what God did in the gospel, is in love, he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. When we were separated because of sin, he made the first move to turn to us and to pursue us and to give himself up for us at the cross so that we can live a life together with him in relationship. That's service. And so, man, I'll say it often in premarital counseling. I'll preach it to myself, and now I'm going to preach it for all of us, is that the gospel is the best piece of marriage advice you will ever get. And this is what I mean. If you will just, and maybe right now I'm even just talking to husbands, if you will just commit to act out the gospel in your marriage, you will be shocked at how much will change. Somebody has to go first. Somebody has to do something first, and it's you. And so if you'll just commit to whatever Jesus did in the gospel, giving up himself, loving first, all of that, forgiving, man, your marriage is going to be different in a really, really good way. That takes time, but it's also one of the ways that God shapes us and helps us to grow. And Dan, when we were talking, one of the things, I love the way you talked about it, is you said that marriage is an anvil for sanctification. You mentioned another way is that it's a union of two great forgivers. Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I feel like the closest relationship you're ever going to have here on earth is with your wife. You know, she sees you getting out of the shower. Like, she knows everything about you. There's nowhere to hide, you know? And that's why it hurts the most when, you know, you guys, when we say things that hurt, you know, it really, really affects you. People on the outside can say whatever they want about me, but when my wife has something to say, it hurts me and it affects me, and the things that I say to her affect her. And I really, for me, felt like God was just working on me, working on my heart, working on who I am as a man, you know. It was profound. Even just reading Ephesians, it just says, come alive. You know, there's a lot of things, like I hear God now in my day-to-day life, you know, like asking me to do things. And it's just a way, it was just a way of, you know, that's definitely my weakness, is I'm a prideful person. You know, in our Bible study group, it talks about, like, if you are the enemy, how would the enemy, come to you specifically? Everybody's different. So for me, it was pride. You know, as a business owner, it's very easy to be, you know, just self-focused, you know, and that bled over into my relationship. But so God, I think, used the closest relationship that I have here to just tear me down and build me back up, you know. And yeah, so that's that anvil where it just puts me over the top and just goes to work. And boy, it was a difficult journey. I'll tell you that. It was difficult, and it's a daily thing. It's not something where, you know, it's going amazing, but then there's, you know, maybe a week where we just have a bad week and things are not going great, too much stress in the week, and, you know, normal stuff. But in that moment, I remember, die to yourself daily. So there's times where I don't really want to give her a hug, but the reality is in that moment, I just remind myself, I go first. You know, Jesus pursues me every single day, even when I sin against him constantly. So the least this is just, if I want to be Christ-like, I'm going to die to myself and move towards her. And it's made a profound impact.
Yeah, I think, you talk about, they see us when we get out of the shower. Like, marriage is revealing. Like, I keep thinking, like, I think I'm a patient person until my wife tests my patience, right? I think I'm humble until, like, I'm asked or I'm put in a situation where I have to ask for, that I have to admit that I'm wrong, and ask for forgiveness. Like, I think I'm forgiving until my spouse hurts me again and again and again, right? And so it's so revealing, and it shows us really who we are inside, right? And we can't hide that, just like we can't hide anything from Christ. And but here's what I think maybe really important, and maybe somebody needs to hear this, is that the difficulty of marriage isn't necessarily evidence that something has gone wrong. Sometimes the difficulty is where God is doing his deepest work. And I think we have to understand that when we get into a marriage, because everything is not going to be great all the time. There's going to be difficulties. There's going to be struggles. And so it's important to know that God uses marriage to teach us and to shape us and to form us into what he's trying to form us to be. And I think that's why Paul kind of wraps this up here in verse 33 when he says these words that are so powerful. He says, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So husbands love, wives respect. And notice Paul doesn't make either one dependent on the other, right? He doesn't say there like, hey, husbands, love your wives when she respects you, right? He's not telling the wives, hey, respect your husband when he loves you. That's not what's happening here. We have the command to love as husbands. Wives, you have the command to respect. There. If it's the other way around where, hey, I'll love her when she respects me, or I'll respect him when he loves me, that's a transaction, right? But Christian marriage is not a transaction. It's an offering. And we have to continually, like Dan said, we have to offer ourselves. We have to go first and say, every day I'm going to do this. Every day I'm going to go first in loving. Every day I'm going to go first in the respect area. Every day I'm going to go first. And as we do that, like Dan has says and Dan testifies, like things change. Dan stopped trying to fix Heather. And he said he started asking, God, what do you want me to change? Who do you want me to be? As he said, he changed the dance. And it began to move in a different way. And sometimes that's what biblical leadership looks like, right? Biblical leadership goes first. So Dan, when you started practicing your role here to love Heather, like how did she respond? Like, talk to us about that a little bit, and about how she began to, respect you, and tell us, what's different today. Like, what's your marriage look like today?
Yeah, I think when I read to pursue her heart, it was a totally different mindset. I heard a great quote, which is, "You can be right or you could be married," and yeah, that just kind of hit me. I've also heard somebody say, "Lose every argument," and the domineering side of me is lose every argument. Like, I want to win everything. Like, I want to win at everything in life. I put Heather through heck, let me tell you. Like, I would say, I want extraordinary everything, extraordinary marriage, extraordinary, like, just everything, And the reality was, once I pursued her hard and went first, it didn't change overnight, but let me tell you, like, it gave her the space to respect. It just gave her the space to, like, I'm doing what God is asking me to, and the love and the respect and the softening of her heart and all these things, it was because I wasn't doing what I was supposed to do. It made all the difference. It just, yeah, it's changed dramatically. And it's not easy. It definitely isn't an easy journey, but it was necessary. I also thought of this idea. I don't know why I think of marriage and life and success and all these things as like a Super Mario. I was born in the 80s, but a Super Mario game where it's just like you get through the whole level and then you get to the boss, and then you just have to like get through that level and you level up to the next level. And it's just like, I feel like we've found a deeper love and just another level. And you know what the coolest thing is I know that that's not the end, that just continues. And then you get that picture of, the two older people sitting on the porch, just in a love that you can't even explain. This idea that, when you first get married, you think you love them, and you do. But the love that's like over time and hard fought, it's just a love at another level that I've only seen like a glimpse of. And it's just, it's what God really intended.
So, Dan, I imagine here in this room, we're all at different levels. But one thing that's true for all of us is that there's going to be a boss at the end of that level that we're going to have to face, even as we continue to progress. And so I want to ask you your advice for any man, any husband out here who's heard your testimony today, who's heard from Scripture today, and they just want to know what to do next. I want to ask you that question. But first, I think I want to ask you a more interesting question. What if there are wives out here who are saying, I hope my husband's listening, or I wish my husband did that? What advice would you give them as you think about a man also who wants to grow in this area? Does that make sense? Like, what would you say to wives who really want this, but their husbands are still growing in it?
My opinion is, there's nothing wrong with you going first as well in this idea that you move towards him, I know for me that if my wife was, I'm the kind of person when someone pushes on me, I kind of go the other way. It's just how I'm built. So I would say that, just just keep doing your thing, keep praying to God, keep asking for God to work in his heart. And, again, go first. Just show him love, and you be the person who just moves in towards him, and his heart will soften. That would be my, hope, or my advice would just to do the same, and give him the space for God to work in his life, and just, so you guys can come together.
Yeah, that's really good. So I'm going to ask you about, also for the men now, like what advice do you have for men to go next? But before I do, it makes me think of that virtuous cycle that Paul talks about, and you mentioned is, I think if you are a wife who's like, man, how do I get my husband going in this? Going first, but with the respect, is a way to go. And listen, we can't escape Paul's wisdom, which is God's wisdom here, is that when men love their wives, it creates the space for them to want to respect the husband. And so I think about it this way, is like when my wife tells me that she respects what I do for her and for the family, that creates in me the desire to love her for who she is. And so maybe that's kind of the key, is like respecting your husband for what he does, and husbands loving your wives for who she is. That's another great way just to go first. But yeah, your advice for men.
Yeah, I would also say that this idea that, for men, I feel like it's not easy. All this is not easy. Even when you're following the exactly what God is asking for us to do. This is where I feel like having friends and people around you that will confront you. Another thing that we did was, it's called the King's Table, or as Kyle talked about, same thing as mat carriers. People in your life that you can trust, who are not just going to agree with you. I mean, there's been times where I call Kyle and I'm upset and angry, and he will confront me and say, no, you're wrong here. And so that's a huge, powerful way, because even doing all the things I'm supposed to do and going first when I don't want to go first and the struggles of life. I mean, those are just practices that I have in my life now that I never had. You know, I'd have friends and then I didn't have friends, and then I had friends, and I mean, it's difficult. Like, some people have small kids and some people have older kids, and you just go through stages in your life. But man, let me tell you, that idea of a king's table, like to identify the men in your life who can, that are, you know, have a biblical idea and they could be in different stages of their life as well. It doesn't matter. But just this idea that they could hold you accountable and you could just talk to them. Because I can't throw everything on my wife. I can't just come home and just unload all my baggage on her. You know, we're there for each other 100%. But there's definitely things that when I speak to other men about, and that I trust, and that they give me godly advice, it's huge. It really helps me go home and do the right thing and to go first again. And that is a powerful thing.
Dan, thank you so much for all of your advice. Thanks for being vulnerable up here and talking about your marriage. That's something that probably not a lot of people would want to do. But you want to do that, and we appreciate that. Can you give Dan a hand? Thank you so much for being here, Dan. And, I think what Dan has talked about in his journey with Heather and his wife, and I think what our text is telling us here, Zach, in Ephesians 5, I think it really just brings us back to two main things. First is this idea that men, headship begins with you. It begins with your repentance, your humility, your willingness to go first. It's not when she changes, I'll change, but it's this. It's asking this question: God, what are you asking me to change? And how can I be better for her? You can't control your spouse's responses, right? We can't do that. We can't force our wives to respect us. You can't force your husband to love you, those things. But you can decide to be the kind of husband that a wife would respect. And you can decide to be a wife that a husband would love. You can make those decisions. Love goes first. I think that's what we're learning here. And the second, I think it's this idea, and you mentioned it just now, about this king's table, this mat table, mat carriers that we've been talking about here. We're not meant to do this alone. We're just not. We need people that we can talk to. We need people that we can share with. And, you know, we've mentioned therapy and things. And I think everybody should have a therapist. I think everybody should have counseling and talk to people. And I think if you have a healthy marriage, you should still have therapy and get through those things. We're not meant to do things alone. It's just not how we were built. And ultimately, we need a model, something that we can look to. And that's Jesus. It's not some social media influencer. It's not just a bunch of self-help books or marriage books. It's not even Dan over here. We need Jesus. He's what we need. He's the example. And Paul doesn't say, husbands, love your wives the way that Dan loves his, right? Paul didn't say, love your wives the way the culture tells you to do it. He says, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. So men, listen, if you want to stand firm in your marriage, don't start by asking what your wife needs to change. Start looking at Jesus and patterning your life after him. And ask him, Jesus, what do you want me to change? Because that's where Christlike leadership starts, right? It goes first. Let's pray.